Okay, well, first I always start the fluency lesson by telling them what we're going to practice that day. Some days we might be working on accuracy, some days rate, some days expression. Today we worked on accuracy. And then I usually tell them, just remind them why we need to be reading accurately. Tell them the reasons why, and then also I'll tell them when they need to be doing it. So they know it's something they need to be doing all the time, not just when I'm listening to them or a partner's listening to them. They need to do it all the time. And then from there, I model. And first I'll try to actually read it through, all the way through fluently, so they can hear what that sounds like without making any mistakes. And then usually when we practice accuracy, I'll usually model just pretending I come to a word and I don't know it, and I'll model to them how I can use strategies to figure out that word, just to kind of be reminding them of that strategy. And then after that, I'll usually model it inaccurately, so they can hear that and they can hear what it sounds like when they do that. And a lot of times they'll get laughing, and it's kind of fun or kind of silly when we do it, but at least it lets them hear what it sounds like if they were to do that in their own reading. And after I've modeled the correct way and the incorrect way, then we go from there, we practice it all together. Sometimes I'll do an echo read. Sometimes we'll do a choral read. Today I did a choral reading. It kind of sometimes depends on what we're practicing and what I choose to do. And then after that, I'll usually start breaking it down, where we might divide, like the girls do this part, boys do this part, kind of in smaller groups so I can hear them. And sometimes I'll divide it into teams, different parts of the room. And then after that, we usually do the partner reading. And I usually try to walk around and monitor them and make sure that the partners are listening to the other partner read, and that they're helping them with the words if they do not know the word, that they're using their strategies if they come to words they do not know. Because I like to make sure that they're following through and they are doing that. And then after that, we usually do an individual read. And like you saw today, we will get out our whisper phones. And then after that, I always have them assess and feel and think about how they feel they did that day. When I work on rate, usually if it's something, we've talked about, if you're reading something that's giving you a lot of information, kind of like the story we were doing today, or if it's something that's new to us, we haven't practiced much, usually we'll talk about how you could read it a little slower. But I'll model how you shouldn't read it too slowly, so I'll model that, or it sounds really boring and not very interesting. If we're doing something that's easy, sometimes we'll do poetry, something that's maybe an easier story or something. I'll model how you can read a little faster, but then again, it shouldn't be too fast, or it doesn't make sense either. So we'll model that, and then we usually scaffold it the same way. And then with expression, sometimes we'll practice on pausing when you come to a punctuation mark, so the correct pausing, or try to read at least 3 words before they pause. And I'll model the correct way to do it. We'll model the incorrect way, where I pause at all the wrong places and they can hear how funny that sounds, how choppy that sounds. Or I'll even model not pausing at all, and so they can hear that. So I'll just change like the modeling at the beginning, but then the scaffolding is the same. Same with when we do expression. Sometimes if we're reading like a story or a poem and there's a lot of expression with your voice, we'll talk about how when you read, you should not sound like a robot. You need to read like someone is talking. And I'll model how that sounds like and then how that doesn't sound like, so they can hear that. And then I'll try to make them put a lot of expression in their voices, and that actually gets pretty fun when we do that. What I always try to think of at first is, what is my objective? What am I wanting them to learn? And what do I want the outcome to be? And then from there, I always try to think of, at the beginning of my lesson, I always try to tell them what we are going to be learning, so they know right away what we are learning. And then I always try to tell them why we're going to be learning it, and then I give them examples and non-examples. So I usually have to think through that at first. And sometimes I find I even have to write it down, like just a little note, just to remind myself, because sometimes I'll get up there and I might forget, or I might get distracted. So if I have it written down, it kind of helps too. And then from there, I just always try to scaffold it, and sometimes they might even do their individual practice or their partner practice, like small group practice, at a center. So sometimes we might not finish the whole lesson as a whole class. Instead, it might be something they do later on when they go to a center. And I've even found, I mean, when you use explicit lesson planning or with lessons with your class, it helps everything just go better because the kids understand what they're learning. It's not a big question mark, and they understand why they're learning it, and they can see the importance of needing to know it. So I think because of that, they'll listen. So it could, because they can see the importance. So it actually even works even in math or even in other subjects. It's actually effective too. I have found, like I said, when I tell them what we are learning and why we are learning it, they listen better. I know when I used to teach, I used to sometimes ask them questions right at the beginning. Like, why do you think this or that? And sometimes it would just completely go off the subject. And it would throw everything off, and it would slow the lesson process down. And sometimes it wasn't as effective because we weren't able to move right into the lesson. They didn't understand why we were doing it. So if you just tell them that right at the beginning, they'll focus in better and they understand why they're doing it and they'll listen better. Also, if you scaffold it down like I model, and then we do a whole group and then we scaffold it down, by the time they're doing it individually, they should have enough practice that they could now do it by themselves. Instead of me just modeling it and then having them do it by themselves, a lot of times some of them are not quite ready for that. So it makes it actually harder for them to do. Whereas if you scaffold it, then they'll understand better and they can actually do it more independently.